Welcome to episode 77 of Sport SA Daily Diary. Today we're chatting to two-time World Champion, South African Xterra racer, Bradley Weiss. Bradley, good day. How are you doing all the way in the US?
How's it, Adam? Thanks a lot for having me on. We locked down in the US for now, and hopefully things improve over the coming weeks.
We were just chatting now, but before we started the interview, about you being stuck there and probably better from a training perspective, you say?
Yeah, we came out to the US early March for 70.3 Oceanside, which unfortunately got taken off the table pretty soon after we arrived. But we decided that we would just stay in the US. At the time, sort of COVID was pretty new, not 100% new on the radar, but no one really knew how bad it was this side. So in hindsight, we potentially should have headed home, but we decided we would stay this side. We've been lucky enough to have access to the outdoors all hours of the day, unlike my poor friends back home in South Africa who are having to deal with some pretty ridiculous laws, in my opinion. We've been lucky enough to continue training as much as we can. Of course, no access to swimming pools or gyms or anything like that. But as far as biking and running and being outdoors, we have had access to that, which has been great.
We chat about biking and running and swimming. So you're obviously a triathlete, but an Xterra triathlete. We'll get onto that shortly. I see you've got a road bike behind you, though. Do you do a bit of both?
So the house that we're renting here in the US, it's actually Flora Duffy's house. The more well-known, the triathletes amongst us will know that name pretty well. So that's the house. So that's her bicycle hanging on the wall. I'm not sure which one actually it is, but it's one of her fancy ones that Specialized, a shared sponsor of her and I. They've made some pretty fancy and impressive bikes for her. So she's hung one of them on the wall. I'm pretty sure she won. She dominated a few races on that bike.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, my start in triathlon was definitely Xterra, and her husband Dan Hugo was one of the big reasons for me getting into the sport in my earlier days. But yeah, I had a very, very late start to triathlon. Only got into it at around the age of 20. And as I sort of improved within the sport, there was opportunity to take my racing professionally after university. So decided to give it a crack and, take the traditional gap year, I guess, that South Africans like to do. There was never any intention of making money or being a full-time professional, but it was just a good reason to spend a lot of time outdoors training and do a bit of traveling. So that was the original idea, and here we are 10 years later and still going strong. But getting back to your question regarding road cycling, in the last sort of 2 years, I have shifted my focus from the Xterra format of triathlon racing over to 70.3. It's definitely been challenging, but throughout my 20s, I always did want to get back to some road racing. And of course, the Ironman brand is very, very strong in the road racing triathlon scene. So both from financial and sponsorship reasons, as well as just my own personal aspirations within the sport, I was always going to shift back to some road racing.
Just for the listeners, Bradley, Xterra is obviously off-road triathlon. It's relatively new when you think of triathlon as a sport. It hasn't been around for that long. When did you, you say you got into it at the age of 20, but what made you kind of get into it before at that age? Why not the traditional triathlon?
So growing up, I went to proudest high school in Stellenbosch. And played traditional sports of rugby and cricket, and didn't really have any endurance aspirations at all. But Dan Hugo was the head boy of the high school when I came in my junior year of high school, and he was a pretty influential head boy. And I followed his career after he left school, and I was just pretty intrigued as to what he was doing, but still didn't really have any intention of trying to do triathlon. And when I was in university, I went to the university in Stellenbosch called Marty's, and I was studying financial accounting. And my dad decided that it would be a good idea to sign myself and my brothers and him up for a triathlon out in Langebaan, just up the west coast of South Africa. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. At the time, I didn't really continue my rugby and cricket playing days into university. I wasn't really interested in those sports anymore. So I was kind of in limbo in terms of like what I wanted to do as a hobby. And the triathlon just like kind of took that spot. And I really enjoyed the social aspect of triathlon and the community of it. They really were super welcoming and wanted to help. And yeah, it basically replaced my social life, to be honest. The weekends we went out on long rides, and yeah, it was a fun way to keep fit and healthy. And then, of course, because I was following Dan's career, I knew that there was the sport of Xterra triathlon, and one of the biggest Xterra races was just over the mountain in Grabo. Unfortunately, that race is not around anymore. Hopefully, it'll come back onto the calendar at some point. But it was an amazing opportunity that required very little investment in travel in terms of cost. And I went and did that race a couple of years, just the light race or the sprint, before stepping up to the longer distance. But as I say, there was never any intention of taking it professionally. And then in 2012, Dan unfortunately had an accident here in the US. He had a bike crash, and he was recovering back home in South Africa. And during this recovery process, him and I sort of reconnected. I knew who he was, but he didn't really know who I was. And we started doing a bit of training together. And yeah, my progress like really just was on a trajectory that I could begin to contemplate performing within the Xterra professional ranks. Xterra, as you say, is a pretty new and small sport, especially within the professional field. So there was definitely an opportunity to kind of bridge that gap between complete amateur and professional. And Xterra gave me that opportunity. And coming out of university, I didn't want to go straight into, the world of corporate finance. So I decided to run around in Lycra for a little bit first. And I'm still running, apparently.
Running away from the corporate accounting, I'm sure. And Brad, just for those, again, that don't know, Xterra is rough water swim, mountain bike, and trail run. What is a rough water swim? How does that differ from a sea swim for a normal triathlon?
I'm not sure who wrote that description, but that is not 100% accurate. It's just a 1.5 kilometer swim. So it's comparable to the Olympic distance on-road format of triathlon racing in terms of distance. So they generally aim for somewhere between 2 and 2 hours 20 for the professional field. And depending on the terrain that we're taking on the mountain bike side of things, they'll either make the bike leg a little bit shorter if it's very demanding and will be pretty slow going, or a little bit longer just to make sure that the race is around that 2 hours to 2 hours and 20 mark. I guess the rough water swim comes from the island of Maui, where Xterra World Championships takes place every year, normally in October, but this year it's scheduled for November. Who knows if that'll go ahead or not. But anyway, the swim is there, and Maui is very well known as the surfer's paradise, and there's some massive surf that can pick up there. And it's been pretty amazing. Like the last few years that I've been, the week of the race, it's been like completely flat, perfect, idyllic conditions, and then race morning you wake up, and before you can even see the ocean, you can hear it, because there's like this rumbling, roaring sets of waves coming in. I love it. It's a lot of fun. Once you have played in the surf a little bit, it's not too bad. So yeah, the rough water swim it's just a swimmer. They try and make it all dramatic with Xterra, but yeah, once you get onto the mountain bike, then it gets a little bit more gnarly and serious.
Yeah. And Brad, you talk about the World Champs in Hawaii. You've had a couple of successful visits out there.
Yes, I've been lucky enough to win that race twice. Unfortunately, fell short by 25 seconds. in 2018. But yeah, my first Xterra World title was in 2017. It was kind of unexpected, really, to be honest. I traveled there for the first time in 2014, and had a pretty good race, but I think just my inexperience cost me, and I ended up finishing 9th that year. And then I skipped it entirely in 2015, came back in 2016 and had an horrific race. It was really, really wet. Unfortunately, the specific location of Xterra World Championships on the island of Maui is in a small area called Kapalua, and it catches a lot of the rainfall on the island. So I think by the time the athletes get to the race, they have sore necks because you're just looking up at the sky every single second of the day to see whether or not it's raining. So it's quite a stressful week, because if it does rain, they've got this almost like red dirt clay on the island that when it gets wet, it's like completely unplayable. Anyway, so in 2016, I feel like that was one of my best years of preparation, but I decided to prepare in South Africa for that, and traveled out to the island of Hawaii pretty late. And that just, again, is just a learning curve that you can't travel that late. It'll end up biting you. It's 12-hour time zone difference. So it's exactly the opposite side of the world to South Africa. And you really need a few weeks at least a couple of weeks to recover from that travel. So ever since then, I've prepared for the race in Boulder, in Colorado, where we are now. And it's a much easier hop over to the island. It's also US territory, so there's no customs issues or anything like that, which definitely makes the travel easy and smooth, and allows you to perform at the best of your ability come October. So 2017 was my first year where I did prepare for the race, and it obviously takes quite a significant financial investment in doing a training camp in the US, then flying yourself over to Hawaii, which is no cheap feat. So yeah, by the time I eventually cracked the code and won it in 2017, it was a massive relief, and it was actually my dad's 60th birthday, and him and my mom had come out to the island to watch the race. So it was very special and a very memorable experience. But winning your first one is like all goes past in a bit of a blur. And 2018 came back to the island, and unfortunately, it was another wet year, and had a few mechanical issues on the bike, and ended up losing the race by 25 seconds. So that was a bit of a blow. So to come back in 2019 and win the race was very satisfying, and hopefully on track to try and catch our fellow countryman Conrad, who has got 4 Xterra World titles to his name.
Well, I mean, you're still relatively young, because you would imagine in the sport of triathlon, 30 is sort of coming into your prime. So I would imagine you've still got a good few years to get there.
31, so getting up there. You're all right. Conrad, who I mentioned earlier, he only started racing Xterra at the age of 30 or 31, and he managed to rack up 4 Xterra World titles and another 4 or 5 ITU World titles. So he definitely paved the way for South Africans. And yes, in terms of age, I think that the sport of triathlon is definitely becoming more and more financially rewarding. So people are looking at ways and means to extend their career as long as possible. And it's pretty evident, especially in long course racing, that the guys in their late 30s are actually performing the best. A guy like Jan Frodeno is 39 this year, and he's the current Ironman world champ. So I think it definitely proves that if you look after yourself and give yourself that time, like triathlon, you just need time. That's what I've realized over the years, is that there's no quick fix to anything. It takes years and years of consistency and dedication to the sport, and eventually it does pay off. So I do look forward to spending that time within the Ironman ranks now. And it took me probably 8 years before I felt really confident on the Xterra scene. So I hope to continue that trend within Xterra, and hopefully not racing as much Xterra doesn't damage my ability to win that race. It'll always be a big race on my calendar as long as I do the sport. Potentially when I move to the full Ironman distance, it will be a little bit difficult to spread my my abilities over a 2-hour race all the way to an 8-hour race. They require pretty different preparation. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for now, the 70.3, which is the half Ironman distance, which is roughly a 4-hour event for the professional field, and then Xterra, which is, as I say, between a 2 and a 2.5-hour race. Those two formats of racing seem to complement each other really well. I get a good amount of like endurance work done for the 70.3 format of racing, and then bringing the Xterra side of things into, I have a lot more of like explosive power over the guys who just exclusively focus on Ironman. So I do think that that combination gives me a good benefit.
And I mean, Brady, just you talk about the two different variations between Xterra and the 70.3. In terms of the training, there must be a slight difference there, because I mean, for a roadie, it's okay. You can ride a mountain bike. But if you're racing mountain bike, you can't just get some training in the road. And then similar on trail running and road running. So what is the variance in training that you need to do in terms of Xterra versus 70.3?
Yeah, so surprisingly, the volume hasn't gone up that much. There's been a bit of a jump in volume, but it hasn't been huge. I'm lucky enough I think if I was left to my own devices, I would have buggered it up properly. But I've been working with some really, really smart coaches. Ernie Grun is my running coach, and we've been working together for coming up on 5 years now, I think. And he was Ilana Mayer's running coach during her sort of the peak of her career. So he's got a lot of experience within that half marathon distance. And he coaches everybody from, short distance track athletes all the way through to marathon athletes. So he's got a very good gauge on both short and long distance running, and he's been very, very influential in getting me to a point that I can feel competitive over the half marathon distance. We still feel like there's a lot to improve on. Just my base of that foundation of training. You can't just jump into 100-kilometer run weeks and expect yourself to hang in there. I'm relatively robust, but I have almost had some type of injury every year. So you have to be super careful in that loading and volume-wise, going over to the longer course stuff. And then on the cycling side, I've been working with Mike Postumus for the last 2 years. He's based out in Cape Town at the Sports Science Institute there, and he's also just been awesome. He sort of took me through to that 2019 Xterra World title, and in that year we put a lot of work onto the TT bike. One thing is obviously the distance, that it is longer on the road racing side of things, but then again you're on a time trial bike, which is a very different biomechanical position to try and generate power in comparison to a mountain bike where you're relatively upright and seated. So it's quite easy to generate power in a mountain bike position, but in a time trialing position it is very different. And that we always expected that to take a bit more time to learn and to get my body to adapt. And then to get off of that bike and run a solid half marathon, it's definitely no easy feat to do. But I do feel that the years of conditioning have definitely helped me. And in terms of the training, we've definitely included a lot more sort of steady state, longer style intervals. But Mike is very smart with his training and never allows me to get too sort of flat. If you do too much of the longer steady state intervals, you'll end up just kind of burning yourself out and losing all of that fast twitch muscle fiber, which I feel is something that is definitely a big advantage to me. If I go out and do a 70.3 bike course, I generally try and pick the more hilly courses with punchy climbs and stuff, because for me it just feels natural to come out the saddle and do a mini kind of sprint up the hill. Coming from the mountain biking background, you're doing that all the time. So I like those courses where the terrain changes a lot, and it feels like an advantage I have over my competitors within the 70.3 world. But definitely still a lot to learn, and some races have gone better than others within the 70.3 world. my on the nutrition side of things, it's also been a pretty big challenge. With a 2-hour race, you can, off of a good breakfast and a good like pre-hydration program, you can almost get through a 2-hour race not even consuming anything, but that will come back to bite you pretty quickly in a 70.3 race. So yeah, on the nutrition side of things, I feel like we're making progress, and we're incorporating a lot more of that into my training to get my body and my digestive system used to trying to consume calories both on the bike and on the run.
Yeah. And I mean, you chat about the training and the different nutrition and those sorts of things. I worked on the Ipswich Cape Epic for 6 years, and over the years I learned the importance of the guys needing to learn skills and how they can improve their time at the Epic by just improving their skills. Is that something you work on as well for your Xterra, and is that something there's quite a key focus for your Xterra racing?
Not so much. I mean, obviously, an Xterra race is nothing like a UCI World Cup or something like that in terms of technical features. However, I was very lucky to grow up in Stellenbosch, where we have Jonkershoek Valley and a few other really awesome mountain biking trails. So even today, where my focus has definitely shifted to the road racing side of things, I still find myself on the mountain bike at least 2 to 3 times a week, just because I really enjoy being out in nature and riding the trails that we have access to there in Stellenbosch. So I think that did benefit me more than I give it credit for. I was also lucky enough to obviously originally have the guidance of Dan Hugo, and then I lived with one of the professional mountain bikers, James Reed. Him and I were housemates for a few years, and I just tagged on a lot with his training, and he was exceptionally good on the technical side of things. So I definitely learned, I think, through just riding with better riders than myself. And absolutely, if your technical skills are superior over your competitors, you definitely can save a lot of energy. However, the Xterra races tend to not be that technical. It's more of a fitness test than a technical test. I would love for them to be more technical. And on the professional side of things, we are pushing for potentially for the Xterra courses to go towards a lap course, similar to like a UCI mountain biking event of like a 4 or 5 kilometer lap that we do multiple laps of. One, it's obviously a lot more spectator friendly, and it's easier to film and follow as somebody like wanting to watch online. And then obviously just bringing that technical aspect into the racing would be awesome. And I think it's definitely the way forward for the Xterra platform of racing. But it was never really something that I never like scheduled in a technical session on the bike. It was just, that was more like my easy sort of hour or 90-minute rides. Instead of going out and spinning on the road, I would go into the mountains and go and play on the trails. So I think it just became pretty naturally to me, and I was doing technical training without even focusing mental energy on calling it technical training and trying to focus on any specific aspect of the mountain bike. Yeah.
Okay. And Bradley, you chatted about injury earlier. You had quite a bad left leg bone injury a few years ago. Was that a low point in your career, and is it something that you learned from? That your body's resilient and how to come back from it?
Yeah, so that injury was pretty much exactly a year ago now. It was April 2019, and so coming off the loss at Xterra World Champs in 2018. Going into 2019, I definitely carried a bit of momentum out of that. I think it gave me a lot of motivation to try and correct my wrongs. And at the same time, mentally, I was shifting to the 70.3, a more 70.3 focus. So the first 70.3 on the 2019 calendar was the South African race out in East London. And I went there, and that was my first 70.3 win. So I definitely started 2019 probably too fit. My fiance Nina, who I've been with now for 5 years, she's obviously seen these what do you call it? How you peak multiple times through the season, and she was always of the opinion that being that fit in January can't be good for your season. And because all of our big races are towards the end of the season, it's very difficult to try and peak in January and then maintain that form throughout the year of racing, and then try and do your A races being World Championships in October. It's a really long season, and it just doesn't make sense. So I probably potentially trained too hard through like December, January, but it resulted in a race win at 70.3 South Africa, and obviously took that high. Then won the Xterra South African Champs in February, and then traveled over to Taiwan and did the 70.3 Taiwan race, which I won there. And that was my first international 70.3 victory. So I started on like this amazing trajectory. And then after that was the Xterra Asia Pacific Championships, also in Taiwan in March. So it was 4 races by March that I'd won. And in that Xterra race, the Xterra Asia Pacific Championships in Taiwan, it's a point-to-point bike, and you finish the bike leg at the top of, not the top of a mountain, but like in the forest. And then the 10K run is back down to the ocean. So it was 7Ks downhill. And coming off of the 70.3 race the week before, I think my body was just a lot more tired than I gave it credit for, and unfortunately resulted in a stress fracture of my left leg. Winning the 70.3 South African Champs gave me a slot to the 70.3 World Championship race, so that was the focus for the year. So the fact that the injury came in April was almost potentially a blessing in disguise, because it forced me to take, they told me 3 weeks originally, which ended up being 9 weeks off of running, which was probably the longest I'd taken off of running since I'd started racing. So it was super frustrating. And I think if I knew that I would have to have taken 9 weeks off from the start, it would have been easier. But because I had this 3 weeks in my head, by the time 3 weeks came, there was almost no improvement. And as anyone with a stress fracture will know, they just need time. Like you can't rush it back. There's no quick fix. You just need to sit yourself down and wait, which I found pretty frustrating. And as you say, like it definitely was one of the probably the low point of my career. I just found it very frustrating. I had big goals for the year, and coming off of a really great start to the year, I had really good momentum and good fitness, and I wanted to make use of it. So I missed a few important races, but in hindsight, it was probably a blessing in disguise, and allowed me to take that time off over the middle of the year and get back to training sort of late June. I got back into it, and then went over to Europe in July. And obviously the first few races back were pretty wishy-washy. Just getting the cobwebs out again, which I expect most of us coming out of this COVID-19 is going to be there will probably be a few guys smashing it with some new bike course records after all the time they've done on Zwift. But generally there's a few cobwebs to blow out. So I didn't race very well initially, and then went up to Livigno, Italy, where I try to do a training camp there every year with Sebastian Kinley. And we were both preparing for the 70.3 World Championships, which I managed to get a top 10 my first year racing as a professional at the professional race of the 70.3 World Champs. So I was very happy with that top 10. I think it was a great start. Like as a first year shifting to the 70.3 distance, I think that was a great start. And yeah, unfortunately, this has now put a bit of a stop or a pause to the trajectory, but really look forward to getting back to some racing at some point later in the year.
Yeah, and long may the sort of rise in your trajectory grow. Bradley, just in closing, having started fairly late in your career, I mean, you look at 20, and that's I mean, it is pretty late. You've won races in Taiwan, you've won races on home soil, you've been a world champion. You've represented your country. I mean, that's a pretty awesome career to have. Did you ever foresee it being that good? And what's been the proudest moment of your career?
Yeah, absolutely not. I think if you had told me at 21 that's 10 years later I would have 2 Xterra world titles and a few 70.3 international victories, I would have told you're crazy. But Yeah, it was never the plan. It was never the goal to try and win a world championship. It was really just I really enjoyed the day-to-day training of it, and it's the lifestyle that it gives you is really awesome. Having the opportunity to travel to all of these places, I've been to areas of the world that I know I would never have gotten to had it not been for the sport of Xterra. So I'm very, very grateful to the sport of what it's given me in my 20s. And now going into my 30s, I think the focus is definitely shifting a little bit more to the professional side of the sport. But that was never the intention to start with. I really just love the community aspect, especially within Xterra. It is slightly different to road racing and the mentality of the people. Everyone's very welcoming and supportive of one another, even within the professional field. I often find myself doing training camps with fellow professional athletes, which is quite unique to a sport where we're all racing for the same prize at the end of the day. So yeah, I think my proudest moment would have to be my first 70.3, my first Xterra World title in 2017. It was definitely something that I never thought I would achieve. So to tick that box, I'm still looking back today. I'm super proud of that, and hopefully can keep building on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, forevermore, you can refer to yourself as a world champion. There's not too many people in the world that can do that.
Yeah. Let's hope back.
It's been fantastic talking to you today on Sport SA Daily Diary. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
stay safe there in the US, and we look forward to seeing you on the top of the podium at one of the 70.3s coming up soon.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Bye-bye. In tomorrow's episode of Sport SA Daily Diary, we'll be chatting to one of South Africa's favourite jockeys, Gavin Lerena.